So thank you very much for joining. My name is Natalie Merritt and I'm the Head of Knowledge Dissemination in the Schools Division at Anna Freud. I'd like to warmly welcome you to our webinar this afternoon, which will focus on the importance of prioritising staff mental wellbeing as part of a whole school or college approach. We're delighted that so many of you have made time to be with us today. I'm going to move on and just tell you a little bit about housekeeping before we start. So for this afternoon's webinar, all attendee microphones and cameras have been switched off. If you'd like to submit a question to our speakers for the Q&A later, please do pop that in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen. Our support team are monitoring the Q&A, so if you have any technical questions, do let us know. We've also we've put on closed captioning for this webinar, but you can disable or make smaller in your settings, also at the bottom of the screen if you'd like to. The webinar today will be recorded and shared on the Anna Freud YouTube channel in the next few weeks, and where we have permission from speakers, we'll share the presentation slides with you. And finally, if you're using socials, our handle is @AFNCCF, and please do tag us and use the Schools in Mind hashtag. So this afternoon, I'm delighted to be joined by an experienced panel of speakers who will explore techniques and strategies to support your own and your colleagues' well-being. Staff well-being is arguably the most important aspect of a whole school or college approach, yet it's often the element that gets neglected due to pressure, workloads, and of course the desire to prioritise your students' well-being. As we'll explore throughout the webinar this afternoon, there are many links between the well-being of staff and the outcomes of students. And we've probably all heard of the expression, you can't pour from an empty cup. And I think it's incredibly important to take time to reflect on this and remind ourselves of this also. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from our speakers and also to hear your reflections and questions in the Q&A section of the webinar, which we'll be getting to later on. As you can see from the slide, we'll have plenty of time for the Q&A. We'll have about 25-30 minutes for the Q&A at the end. And as mentioned, please do add your questions to the Q&A box on screen. Before I hand over to our wonderful speakers, I just wanted to highlight a couple of our kind of latest initiatives. So first of all, I wanted to highlight our refreshed resource, which is 10 ways to support staff wellbeing, which was launched last week. It's based on 10 key recommendations to support staff wellbeing, and it's informed by research. It was launched a few years ago, but we've refreshed it and now put it into a new format, which includes an action planning guide and a template. And it's really useful to give you some further ideas, or indeed to use the template as part of your whole school or college approach, or perhaps your development plan. And then I also wanted to mention our online mental health support, our schools and college support service. And it's for secondary schools and colleges, and it offers support from specialist practitioners with clinical expertise using evidence-based approaches informed by the latest research. And you can find out more information about it via the link in the chat, which should be going in now. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker for this evening. So I am delighted to introduce Manisha Jeffcutt. Manisha is one of our colleagues who works in the schools division at Anna Freud, and she's the training manager in the schools division, and she's an education expert with extensive teaching experience. Having worked in a diverse range of schools as a senior leader specialising in mental health, behaviour and safeguarding, Manisha has a strong understanding of the current challenges within education. She's passionate about providing schools and staff with the knowledge and tools necessary to support children and young people's mental health and well-being. Manisha leads training across several projects, including government initiatives and specialist training packages. She has vast experience of delivering a wide range of mental health training to senior education leaders and staff to foster cultural and organisational change within their school settings. This includes a fundamental understanding of the impact of developing a whole school approach to school communities. Thank you for joining us, Manisha. I'm going to hand over to you now.
So thank you so much for that introduction, and very good evening to everybody. And thank you so much for joining us. It's really lovely that you've been able to be here with us after what I'm sure has been a very, very busy day. And I remember those days well. So thank you. And I'm really hoping that through this session, we're going to be able to talk to you about, a little bit about the context and where we find ourselves right now, and absolutely recognizing the challenges that school staff are facing, but also to give you some practical tips and suggestions and ideas about how you can really use a whole school approach to support staff wellbeing. So I'm hoping that you'll find that's really helpful. Okay, so without any further ado, I just want to get started, and I just want us to think about what we're hoping to achieve through this session. So we're really hoping that by the end of this webinar that we are going to have been able to improve your understanding of the approaches for overcoming common barriers to implementing a whole school approach to staff wellbeing, as well as an increased knowledge of practical skills and what actually works. So really hoping that we're going to be able to do that this afternoon. So I think it's really important that we really consider the context that we find ourselves in. And although I've now been out of teaching for a few years, I absolutely work really closely with school staff, and I can see and recognise the pressures that they are under. So I think it's really important that we just think about where we are now. And I just want to draw your attention to some of the challenges that are currently being faced by educational professionals. And neither of these things are going to come as a surprise to you, I'm sure. But at Anna Freud, we pride ourselves on using lots and lots of very current research, and this is no exception. So recent research tells us that education professionals report that rising financial hardship is presenting in many ways. So families are really struggling to manage with some of the expectations that schools require. So things such as uniform requirements. And also, and I remember this from when I was in school, children coming to school, they've not had breakfast, they're hungry, they're tired due to the conditions that they are living in. Some of them don't have a bed, they don't have a space that they can call their own. These are challenges that they're bringing into the school setting, and then are obviously affecting school staff who are supporting and working with those children and young people. Something else I wanted to draw your attention to is that 81% of school staff experienced at least one behavioural or psychological or physical symptom of poor mental health, which is linked to their work. And this is from a very recent Teacher Wellbeing Index of 2023, so just last year. And I think, again, this speaks to the fact that we know that school staff are really having to hold so much, and it is taking its toll. They are really being impacted and affected by that. And I remember holding some really tricky safeguarding situations when I was working in senior leadership, and driving home and just feeling really full but helpless as to what I could do, and the impact that that had on me and my own mental health. So I think just to sort of take a moment really to think about some of the further barriers that school staff are already experiencing. So one of the first things, and the context that we want to draw your attention to, is that, I think it's really important to understand the situation of inadequate funding. So we know that many public sector schools and colleges are operating with severely inadequate funding. Last year, nearly half of primary schools were running in-year deficits. I think something else to consider is that many schools are really struggling with staffing shortages, which is caused by a long-standing recruitment and retention crisis that has further worsened since COVID, with a near doubling in unfulfilled teacher vacancies in the last 2 years. And the retention and indeed the effectiveness of staff being impacted by staff wellbeing concerns in the recent teacher wellbeing report that I shared with you, I think that absolutely sort of speaks to that. The third thing is the structural and systemic inequalities that schools are experiencing. So, we do know that not all schools and all school staff are impacted equally. And it means that some school staff from minoritised groups are more negatively impacted. So some staff, for example, from racially minoritised backgrounds are more likely to work in schools serving communities with high levels of material poverty, but are much less likely to be promoted to senior positions. Women, too, are underrepresented in the workforce as a whole, and staff from minoritised groups experience discrimination and abuse. and the whole workforce experiencing professional development, workload, and resourcing problems is another challenge that some schools are facing. And as most of you will be aware, there is limited consensus across the system as to the solutions of some of these challenges, with a polarized policy and practice landscape presenting a challenge in itself. So that kind of just gives us a context of what schools and school staff are holding right now. And this links again to the more up-to-date staff wellbeing report, which was published this year. And I just want to draw your attention to some of these stats. So one of the first is my workload is manageable. And it's interesting to see here that 20% of staff agree that their workload is manageable. But what you have to also think about is that if 20% are saying it is manageable, we've got 60% there who are saying that it isn't. So over half. The second thing is to say I have enough resources to do my job. And again, we've got 31% there saying that they do have enough resources, but 46% are saying that they don't. So almost half of staff are saying that they don't have the resources. That can be physical resources, it can be actually people, who it's a challenge to actually be able to do their job effectively. And then finally, as senior leaders, 55 are saying that they agree, that they feel supported, but we've still then got that significant 45% who don't. And I think that's really important. So if we then move on to thinking about the context we find ourselves in terms of children and young people's mental health and some of the challenges that they're experiencing. So how does this actually impact on staff? So according to the most recent figures, so that's the NHS Digital Survey of 2023, almost 1 in 5 7 to 16-year-olds have a probable mental disorder. So that means, in relative terms, that in a class of 30, up to 6 pupils could be experiencing poor mental health. And that means that it's going to really impact on school staff and how they're able to manage that. So I think, again, that's really, really important to think about. We know that schools are a really good environment, a really positive environment to promote and support children and young people's mental health and well-being. And most children and young people spend a significant amount of time in school and with their teachers. So that means that when school staff are in a really good, positive place to be able to support children who might be struggling, that's going to really help them get the help that they need. Schools can also help children develop social and emotional skills, providing them with the coping skills and tools they need to understand and manage their own feelings, thoughts, and behaviours, goals, and relationship. So although these statistics reflect what's happening here, it'd be interesting to know, and this could be a question that you want to put into the chat, is this reflective in the same way in your own school setting? So if we just go on to consider some more of the challenges, what we do know around this, and again, this is from the NHS long-term plan, we know that aims to provide additional support for children and young people aged 0 to 25. But we do know that there are 20% of adolescents who may experience a mental health issue in any given year, and 50% of mental health problems are established by the age of 14. So we know those mental health problems exist. We also know, and we hear it consistently in our training, the waiting times. So the average wait time for children and young people to receive treatment after being referred, and we know the referral process can be arduous, is 35 days. However, we also know that in some areas, some children and young people are waiting for treatment for over 3 years. We know that there is stigma and discrimination, with 2/3 of young people who reach out for mental health support who experience stigma and discrimination. And we also know that this is reflected negatively in a socioeconomic status. So young people from more deprived areas are more likely to report poor mental health. And poverty can prevent young people from accessing opportunities that can really help their mental well-being. I already talked a little bit about the recruitment and retention crisis, but the NFER's new teacher labour market in England annual report of 2024, which was funded by the Nuffield Foundation, reveals that both recruitment and retention issues are persisting, and that the latter is made worse by an increased teacher workload, which has really, really increased since the pandemic. Teachers continue to work longer hours than similar graduates in other jobs, during a typical working week, and workload is cited as the main reason for why teachers leave the profession. Workload challenges are growing as a result of behaviour and pastoral support pressures. So teachers are finding that they're having to hold all of this additional information and support children and young people in a way that they just don't have the capacity to do. And it just refers back to what Natalie said about you can't pour from that empty cup. So we do know that despite workload reduction being a policy priority for the government, NFER's report find that rising teacher working hours means that the government may face a challenge in meeting its workload reduction target. Teachers continue to work longer hours than similar graduates, as I've already said. So I just want to sort of end on a little bit of a positive note to say that there are things that we can do. So the evidence is really clear. Action does need to be taken to address the issue of staff wellbeing. There is no doubt about that. And there are actions that can be taken which cost nothing, they take little time, and they can be implemented immediately. So we know, and I remember so clearly, that actually talking to colleagues can really help boost our mood and reassure us that the world is a safe place to live. Finding opportunities to connect and build those relationships with the people you work with is so important. Having that opportunity to laugh together, just reminisce about maybe something that's happened in school that was funny. And that really does increase your sort of relationship satisfaction and will really help you become more resilient to manage some of those challenges. Emotionally healthy teachers and education staff make effective learning possible. And if mental health and emotional health becomes a cultural priority in your school, then everyone learns, works, and grows together. And the truth is that a happier, healthier staff stay part of your school community for longer. So you are more likely to not change schools. It might sound a little bit of a small thing, but like a quick hug with someone who you really, really like can really lower stress levels. There's research to suggest that that is the case, and it can be as powerful as actually exercise. And it doesn't have to be physical affection, just, you know, speaking to someone, making contact, having a connection can make a huge difference to how you feel. The NEU did a big piece of research around belonging, and that really highlights that staff retention is greater where teachers know they can make a difference and they have a strong sense of personal and professional agency in their school. And when you feel you belong, you can be more creative, innovative, and confident. You can feel respected and accepted. You're more likely to stay longer in an organisation and make more of a contribution, and you have a greater sense of well-being and agency. You feel more motivated and involved and committed to your job. And I just want to reference that final point before I finish around CPD, and just to share with you that training and CPD can also be a really good way of managing staff stress. And with good quality training and CPD, staff can feel better equipped and competent in supporting their students and undertaking their role. Thank you so much. I hope that's given a really good sort of brief context of where we find ourselves right now. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Manisha. I think you've done an amazing job demonstrating the landscape, the challenging landscape in which school and college staff are operating in at the moment, but also bringing awareness of those benefits of prioritising staff wellbeing. And yeah, I liked what you said about just sometimes the sense of belonging and feeling connected through hugs and things. And I can vouch for your hugs as well. You give really good hugs. So yeah, definitely can vouch for that. Thank you. I'm now going to move on and introduce our next speaker. And our next speaker is Ali Sparks, who is another one of my amazing colleagues. She's an experienced schools engagement trainer who works at Anna Freud. Ali is an education specialist with extensive experience of teaching in further education. Following this, Ali worked as Education Services Manager for a regional mental health charity, working with senior leaders and staff from schools and colleges to implement a whole school and college approach to mental health and well-being. Ali has an excellent understanding of the current challenges within education, the diversity of settings, and the ever-changing educational landscape. Ali has worked with local authorities, mental health service providers, CCGs, and education leaders to implement cultural change while taking into consideration the challenges and differing perspectives of mental health in education settings and their wider communities. Ali is passionate about providing education settings with the knowledge and tools necessary to support children and young people's mental health and well-being, providing a supportive and inclusive environment. Huge welcome to Ali. I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Thanks so much. And thank you all for joining us today. It's a really important discussion, and we're just so glad that you could all make it. So, thanks, Manisha, for sort of setting the groundwork and laying out what we know are the challenges, with that bit of extra sort of research to back it up as well, and giving us a clear understanding of what the challenges are. What I'm hoping to do is introduce you, if you're not already familiar with this, introduce you to a graduated approach to supporting staff, and how you can think about different levels of need that they may require. So that's what I'm going to be talking through now. What we need to think about is, when we're thinking about staff emotional well-being, as it says here, experiences of difference can affect our emotional well-being. Emotional behavioural struggles are often valid responses to lived experiences. And there can be so many things that can build into that and that can impact our level of experiences and the way in which we respond to certain situations. It's really important to recognise this and put in the associated distress into context and think about how that's going to impact somebody's level of need, or how they're going to respond when a situation is challenging. When we think about staff wellbeing, ultimately it needs to be rooted in feeling valued. It's about building relationships, as Manisha said, and creating that sense of belonging, and embedding an effective whole school or college approach to mental health and wellbeing is absolutely fundamental. We're very aware of the challenges that work in education can bring and the factors that inevitably increase staff stress levels, such as working with challenging behaviour, the demands of the workload, and the added pressures of observations and Ofsted inspections. At Anna Freud, we acknowledge the recent changes to inspections and are aware that the government is looking at and reviewing current practices. Obviously, we welcome any positive changes that are going to impact staff wellbeing as a result of this, and we watch this space. We need to remember that contextual factors really matter in terms of staff wellbeing. Often staff put their learner needs before their own. We all know that feeling of, actually, I feel rotten, but I'm going to just move on because, they need to learn. And if I'm not available, then other staff are going to have to fill in for me. And thinking about that, and therefore putting ourselves secondary to possibly what we need. We know that to deliver teaching and to be able to support learners, staff need to be fully well, and sometimes it can be hard to identify when we're struggling. The demands of working in education, added to life experiences that happen outside of work, all make it that little bit more difficult and do impact our ability to be able to deliver teaching effectively. That's why we recommend a graduated approach. So we're now going to look at that sort of graduated approach and think about how that looks in terms of offering support on a universal level, which is there for all staff and is just part of the everyday offer. Then targeted and specialist support, considering members of staff that might need an extra layer of support due to the nature of their role. And what we hope that you realise today is that you already have a lot of support methods in place in your setting. Or if not, this might be an opportunity for you to consider what strategies could look like in your setting, and possibly consider what implementing some kind of graduated approach might look like and how you will go about doing that. So I'm going to start with the universal and universal support. As it says here, it's about having an understanding of staff voice. The importance of staff voice is something that I can't emphasize enough. Going back to that sense of belonging, those relational approaches, those relationships are all born out of understanding what people want to say and making sure that they feel valued. So considering that universal layer of support, it's thinking about all staff, regardless of their individual support needs. And that's why staff voice needs to be at the heart of it. Think about how the ethos of your setting promotes an openness about mental health and wellbeing. Do you encourage staff to feel comfortable sharing their concerns? Do staff feel that? Do staff feel comfortable with that? Are they aware that their concerns are going to be listened to and valued? Is there a staff mental health lead or champion who's responsible for coordinating staff approach, the approach to staff mental health and wellbeing, and ensuring that it remains on the agenda? Does the culture and ethos of the school encourage open communication? And is there a real sense of community within the school? As Manisha said, the importance of that hug, it's so important sometimes. Sometimes that's all we need. Sometimes, as somebody said to me in training just recently, just thanks would be nice. Just knowing actually that you've made a difference that day. Also, think about if all staff concerns are treated equally and if they're all given the same weight. Does a member of SLT expressing a concern or a need for support carry any more or less weight than somebody from the support staff or the site staff? So it's thinking about how we understand individual needs and ensuring that there's an equity there. How do staff know that they are being listened to? And for example, if you've got an open door policy, or if you think you've got an open door policy, do staff feel that they can use that open door, or is there a reluctance there to access that? And if it doesn't happen in practice, what does that actually communicate to the staff? So it's thinking about what the barriers might be. It's about prioritising wellbeing, allowing staff to feel heard. They should be given that freedom to have a say in what has an impact on them, their students, and the school as a whole. As we mentioned before, we can't emphasise enough the importance of that sense of belonging. Having wellbeing leaders facilitating staff voice can enable discussions in a free and constructive way. Staff feedback that leads to positive change shows that there's value in what they've said. It can create momentum and improve job satisfaction, which will ultimately impact on the effectiveness of the teaching and therefore the learners, and hopefully that staff retention as well. Feeling valued. Employee engagement through staff surveys can provide a gauge of how they're feeling, and using that staff voice from those surveys can be a platform for open communication, which helps leaders to make better decisions with the input of staff that are respected and acted upon. Improved relations and inevitably increased morale go hand in hand. A setting providing openness and opportunities for staff to speak to whoever they need to help support a culture of mutual respect, understanding and compassion. Again, I've said it before, I'm going to say it again, it's about those relational approaches, and it's about that sense of belonging and how that feeds in. And again, we all need to feel valued. That's the important message here. I appreciate that this is a very dense slide. I have tried to cut it down, but there are so many elements that we need to think about when we think about what we offer in terms of universal support. These are some examples. As I say, we've already cut this down because it was dense enough as it was, but it's just to give you an idea of what universal support might look like. As we've already said, the ethos and environment of the school will have an impact on staff wellbeing. It's about building that culture of trust where staff feel valued and they know how to access support, and that sort of understanding of the pathways to support is at the heart of all of this. Some things that you might consider are like the physical environment, dedicated staff rooms and comfortable spaces. Now, we know that during the pandemic, staff rooms became a thing of the past, and we also know that there are still some settings where that still stands. But on the flip side of that, we know settings where staff rooms are in existence, but they might be spaces where staff go to do some of their planning and prep time. But we also know that there are schools that might have just converted a broom cupboard into somewhere that a member of staff can feel safe going to. It's just allowing staff somewhere to go that is not a place of work and is not somewhere that they're just going to sit and continue on a laptop. It's somewhere where they can actually go and just calm down, be safe, and feel that they can relax for just a short part of the day if that's what's needed. So it's having that dedicated space and ensuring that the staff feel comfortable with it. We don't want it to be just another working space, but ideally a place where staff can take time out. And I appreciate I'm saying that, and there's probably an awful lot of you thinking there isn't the room to do that and there isn't the capacity. But if you can find some space somewhere, it's really important. Policies and procedures. Have you got a wellbeing policy for staff in place? And how is that acted upon? How is that renewed and refreshed? Is it an annually reviewed policy? And is it something that members of staff from all levels of the school can input into? How are policies and processes implemented clearly and equitably? As I said before, you know, regardless of position in the school, is everybody treated the same? And is that acknowledged through policies as well? Policies are a really excellent way of allowing your setting to share that graduated approach and ensure that all staff feel safe and supported. Is there clear communication to staff about both internal and external support pathways? It's really important that staff know what they can access and how they can access it. I'll talk about that a little bit more shortly. Are good working practices and self-care to encourage a work-life balance modelled by leadership. This is really important that we get that message across, that actually we're all modelling that self-care, we're all modelling those sort of important elements that build into our well-being. This can really encourage staff to feel that they're part of something and that they're not slacking off, because that's one of the problems that we have, that people feel that they're not making a big enough contribution if actually they just need a bit of time out. So encouraging regular breaks, finishing meetings on time, maybe meetings a little bit shorter. If we know there's a meeting followed by another meeting, can we make sure there's a break in between them? Having regular meetings with staff and line managers, but also thinking about the ways that we communicate, not sending emails and communications outside of staff hours, and thinking about how that looks. If it does go outside of staff hours, then making sure that staff know that they're not expected to respond outside of their working hours, and that it's just that the time that suits them, the sender, but they're not expecting an immediate response. So it's thinking about how we model our behaviour. And finally, again, to nurture that sense of belonging and value, providing staff with regular opportunities to feedback any thoughts or concerns they have regarding staff wellbeing and how to improve it. That can help to develop a more inclusive culture by co-creating ideas, structures, and thinking about ways that staff wellbeing can be impacted from the beginning of somebody starting a job. So we've got our early career teachers when they come in, and ensuring that they feel that they're able to talk and that they're included, and then that carries on, and hopefully will retain their staff a bit longer. One of the things that we can consider when we're thinking about our staff wellbeing is how we measure how staff feel. I've included this. I've got a couple of slides here from the from Cork and the Evidence-Based Practice Unit. And these are to build awareness of and to respond to staff needs, thinking about ways that you could consider running an annual or biannual wellbeing survey. So this is just to give you some ideas. So as I say, these have been developed by the Child Outcomes Research Consortium and the Evidence-Based Practice Unit, that are projects within Anna Freud. What it provides is questionnaires and surveys, and they're available to help schools and colleges measure and understand the wellbeing of their staff, pupils, and can offer advice and guidance. There's lots of information in there about how that can happen, and there are live links on here as well. On this slide, I apologise, it's quite dense, but there's a lot of information to include. There's a link on here that is a live link to the staff wellbeing measurement tool, and there's information on their page about what that offers and how it can possibly help your school. So it's thinking about what you might need to find out and how you're gonna approach supporting staff with that. So moving through into the targeted area or the targeted level of our graduate approach, thinking about the needs of more sort of specific staff that have possibly greater levels of need. So targeted support is used when there is additional support that needs to be put in place for specific members of staff. For example, if we consider those staff members that face difficult disclosures on a daily basis and therefore might need to have some kind of extra provision put in place to help them process their emotions and thoughts, we think about what we would suggest is that you ensure that you signpost to counselling, that's available, and also considering things like supervision. So I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail shortly. So it's just knowing what's available and how we can make sure that that's visible and accessible to all staff as well. Okay, so thinking about that targeted support a little bit more in a bit more detail, we'd also recommend that you introduce supervision. We know that supervision is difficult to implement in schools. So if capacity and costs are prohibitive to this, then you might consider ways of introducing a reflective practice. This is a way of making a safe space for staff to talk about and reflect on issues or concerns that they may have come across through the day, and think more widely about their practice and the way in which they've responded to a given situation. So it's about reflection and it's about active listening. And also because it's something that isn't clinical, where clinical supervision is something that requires a trained clinician, this is something that can be implemented within your setting and made more widely available to staff. As we know, any member of staff could be the trusted adult to a child or young person, and they could be the person that anybody could be the person that receives a really difficult disclosure. So it's knowing, I'm just going to bring all of these up here, it's knowing that supervision, as I say, it is a core element of health service practice, but it has been less widely adopted in schools, mainly through cost and capacity. We know that some school staff are regularly dealing with very challenging and difficult disclosures, and it's important that staff are able to debrief and detach from that before leaving school, to ensure that sort of work-life balance. As Nisha mentioned earlier, CPD, that training can have a big impact on staff wellbeing as well. There are so many ways to encourage staff training, and thinking about ways in which that can help boost staff's confidence in being able to work with children and young people who are struggling, but also with staff as well. So it's thinking about how you can make that work. Education staff are not expected to be mental health specialists, and I can't emphasize that enough, but training to upskill and empower staff to be able to have conversations where they're required or to identify when somebody's struggling is really important, and that can be really empowering for them. You could also consider introducing regular mandatory wellbeing check-in meetings, using a personal or peer support model. So thinking about just having a way of allowing staff to check in, going back to that open door, is that the way that you introduce your open door, and how open is it, and how comfortable the staff feel with it. Again, I apologize, this is a really heavy slide here. There's lots and lots of information, but there was so much I wanted to include on it. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about, excuse me, the reflective practice and supervision. As I mentioned, if we can offer a way in which more staff can access support through some kind of supervision, but more obviously a reflective practice model that is run within a school, then more and more staff can access that, and it's really important that that's made available. We have got some training coming up. We've recently put some training together, which is BACP training that we're running, which is reflective practice and supervision, and it's all about active listening, and it's all about enabling staff within schools to run some kind of reflective practice model, because we realise that capacity and cost can be prohibitive to offering a model of externally provided clinical supervision. So it's about looking at ways that schools can have some kind of reflective practice themselves. There are so many approaches to supervision, and in general, the aim is to provide an opportunity to think about the needs of students, or the needs of staff, and think about how that works. And for those staff that have concerns about particular students, having a safe space in which they can share those concerns and think about things that are particularly challenging or difficult. There's a lot of information that backs this up, lots of research that backs up the need for specialist supervision or reflective practice. Where we've got somebody in school like a DSL, it might be that they actually receive clinical supervision on a regular basis. However, reflective practice supervision might be something that they could facilitate and offer more widely to other members of staff. Okay. excuse me. So in terms of specialist support, I'm going to just bring up each of these. There are many routes to support, and thinking about ways in which other staff in schools can receive help. But ultimately, it's about that sense of belonging and those relational approaches, which are particularly important for members of staff that need an extra layer of support. Ensuring that staff are aware of the routes of support that are available. If you have an employee assistance programme, does everybody know what that is? Does everybody know what they can access through that? So often we hear on our training that people are aware that there might be an employee assistance programme, but they don't actually know what that entitles them to. So make sure that staff are aware. It might be buried somewhere in a policy, or it might be buried somewhere in a document. But if you can make it a visible thing that they know what they can access and what benefits it can give them. Often there's financial support, often there is counselling support. These are the things that are going to add to stresses for staff, so try and alleviate them with knowing that they can access that employee assistance, making crisis support lines details available to staff, making sure that everything is visible and accessible for staff as well. So when you've got information about support, bruise and lose, that's what we say. So in your staff room where they're going to get a cup of tea, or on the back of a toilet door, make sure that you've got helpline information that is available for all. So making it visible. Being creative and brave as leaders, that's something that we would say. Remember that staff voice, ask staff what they want, and be prepared for answers that might be challenging to implement, but don't write them off. Don't write off those ideas straight away. Consider all options. It might be that your staff mention flexible working, and this is something that in the past has been laughed at as an idea in education, but as time goes on, we realise that the flexibility is more possible. So is it something that can be offered within your setting, and what would it look like? How could it be sustainably supported? Is it possible to offer PPA at home to ensure that that time is protected? So often people's PPA time gets taken away because they've got to cover an incident, or they've got to cover a class where other members of staff are not available. It's thinking about being brave and taking steps that might otherwise be dismissed. An example is Dixon's Academy. There was an article just recently in The Guardian which cited Dixon's Academy Trust that have recently announced that they're going to be bringing in flexible working policies for staff in this academic year. What they're doing is working towards enabling staff to work a 9-day fortnight and offering opportunities for remote working and greater options around flexible working. So they run 16 schools and 1 college, and they've just introduced this 9-day fortnight, and their trust leader said that, this is a quote from him, who's actually called Sparks, but no relation. Luke Sparks, I believe, no relation. Now, he said about schools, they can do what they want. It's about giving people autonomy and agency. The reality is that some people will choose to do some work on that day, which means that they don't need to work in the evenings or at the weekends. It's still in early days. It's a genuine reduction in workload, and we're hoping that it will reduce staff absence. There is so much information, there is so much research to back up the need for staff. And it's worth knowing that there was some research done by the National Foundation for Education Research, the NFER, found that few teachers in England were able to work. I'm just checking actually, yes, it's probably the same report that actually Manisha mentioned earlier. And it cites the fact that there is a real discrepancy there. Very few teachers in England are able to work remotely, putting them at a disadvantage compared to nearly 50% of their peers in other graduate level professions that say they regularly do. Teachers should be given a pay bonus, is what they said in the NFER article, pay bonus to compensate for their inability to work from home and stop the rising numbers attracted away from the classroom for better working conditions elsewhere. Now, this isn't something that we're necessarily saying that you have to do. Certainly, the bonus is one of those things that is out of our hands. However, it is thinking about how we retain the staff and what are those prohibitors, what are the obstacles and challenges. As part of its manifesto commitment to recruit 6,500 new teachers, the government wants teachers to be able to do more planning at home to improve flexibility. But experts say that the sector is going to have to go much further if it's going to compete with other professions. And these are the things that we just need to bear in mind. It's not all bleak. There are some really good things to know, and I'm going to move on to some good news as well. So thinking about those useful strategies, this again fits in with that graduated approach, modeling self-care and thinking about ways of enhancing good well-being. These are just some tips, really. Looking after yourself and others must be a priority. So considering things that we do have in our control and things that we're able to make choices about. Research indicates that taking certain steps can be important in the promotion and maintenance of mental well-being. Knowing our personal limits and having the ability to say no when necessary. This helps you to have more balance in your life, and it will enable you to take better care of others. Also, if you're a school leader, think about how you respond when a member of staff says no. Do staff feel that they can say no? And can you say no? Having an awareness of your own needs and ways of releasing stress. Do you allow yourself time for hobbies? Do you know what your thing is? I know that if I don't get out with my dog for at least an hour in the hills every day, I can be quite unpleasant to live with at times. I just need that time for me to process, and it's my self-awareness, it's my self-care. And as well, talking, there are times when challenging situations can affect us emotionally. Again, that sense of belonging, that those relationships are so important. If you've had a difficult day at school, try to speak to someone before you leave school, because this can really help you process how you're feeling. Ask for support and separate your work from your home life. You don't want to necessarily go home and offload to somebody that you live with. They also might have had a challenging day, and it doesn't want to be a competition. Self-compassion, we have to really think about that. If you take some time to stop and reflect on the thoughts in your head, are they more positive or are they more critical? Once you have identified a negative thought, you can begin to introduce more positive thoughts and turn down that volume on the critical voices or intrusive thoughts. So be aware of what you're thinking about. As it says here, be aware of your limitations. Learning how to feel okay with change. We know that situations change. We know that particularly in schools, people might be required in primary schools to change from reception into year 6 in 1 year. It's one of those things that we need to adapt to change, and we also need to be aware of what our limitations are. And as I say, going back to being able to say no and just being brave. So, as I say, encouraging self-reflection and self-care. I'm not going to go on about this in too much detail because I know that self-care is something that Jane's going to be talking about later, but think about what self-care looks like for you personally and what it looks like in your setting. I popped this in just so there's a bit of extra information for you there. If you're not familiar with Headspace, it's something I recommend, and they are free at the moment for educators. So do look into that. It's a really good space for you to just go and just have that extra bit of support. So it's just a mindfulness app. Mindfulness doesn't work for everybody, but certainly it's a really, really useful tool, and there's lots of really good advice on there. Another thing I'd say as well is think about how think about education support. Education support is not linked to us, but we really do appreciate the work that they do. They are excellent, and they offer lots and lots of support and guidance that is free for education staff. They have a helpline which is 24/7, which is manned for people in need of support, and they offer support across a whole range of concerns that might impact education staff. So please make sure that that number is available to your staff, because it's there. And also, this is some fully funded support that is specifically for school leaders. We do know that there is, or we're aware that there might well be a waiting list with this, but it's what I really think it's important that you're aware that education support are there to offer support if needed. And I just want to draw your attention to that quote: as a head teacher, the buck stops with you. You need to think that you need to think about everyone in your schools. You need to think about everyone in your school's well-being, and that often comes first. But we need to look after ourselves too, or we're no good to anyone. And that is so important. It goes back again to that empty cup that Natalie mentioned. So it's just having an awareness that's there. And I just want to finish with this quote from Jamie as well. Jamie's the director of our schools division. We must do more to support school leaders, teachers and other staff to ensure that their mental health and wellbeing is prioritised. If we don't recognise the importance of this, we will fail not only staff, but the children and young people that we support. And I want to leave you with this excellent resource that Natalie mentioned. This is, as Natalie said, it's really new, and it does provide the action planning guide and a template that's designed to help education leadership teams plan and implement effective staff wellbeing support. It contains information on 10 different ways to support staff wellbeing. And that includes how to measure and monitor staff wellbeing, how to develop a staff wellbeing policy, and very importantly, how to promote a work-life balance. Every school's different, and when it comes to supporting staff wellbeing, what works is going to vary depending on the unique environment of each setting. So we hope that we've given you something to consider, and now I'm going to hand back to Natalie.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Ellie. Thanks for sharing your wealth of knowledge and experiences with us. There's definitely lots to take away from it, and I think it was really helpful to have you outline a kind of graduated response to staff wellbeing. So we look forward to welcoming you back to the Q&A to discuss further. And I'm going to move on and introduce Jane. I'm really excited to introduce Jane Glendenning. And Jane is a foundation leader in education, safeguarding and wellbeing, and she's an assistant head in school. She's also a valued member of our Anna Freud education panel and has supported us with research trials and input into lots of different resources and training development. So Jane has became a teacher in 2005 and worked as a pastoral leader in comprehensives across Birmingham and Dudley before moving to King Edward VI Handworth School for Girls in 2009, where she was Director of Pastoral Care and the designated safeguarding lead for the school. Throughout this time, Jane contributed to discussions with the NHS around students with disordered eating. She's presented to Papyrus about suicide safety in school and has been an early adopter of the Birmingham School's Wellbeing Census. Jane's also trained in mental health first aid and psychological first aid and has delivered staff and parent training on topics ranging from self-harm to family violence and criminal exploitation. Over the course of 10 years, Jane has worked with colleagues across the foundation, and her additional role as FLE for safeguarding and wellbeing is to support schools and particularly DSLs and senior mental health leads. This involves collaboration, reflective practice, policy development, facilitating network meetings, training, and much more. So I'm delighted to hand over to you now, Jane. Thank you.
Thank you. Gosh, that didn't sound like me at all. Bear with me a moment. Can you just confirm if my screen is working? Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, lovely. Let me just shrink everybody and hide myself. So good afternoon, everybody. And I know it's getting on a little bit, so hopefully there will be things that I talk about now that will be of benefit to you. So I'm not going to talk in lots of detail about my background because Natalie has very kindly explained all of that. But to supplement some of that information, I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about myself. So I'll be 58 next week, which means that I am permanently tired at the moment. I am a self-proclaimed perfectionist, which actually means that I have a lot of feelings of inadequacy. I'm quite hypersensitive. I'm extremely self-critical. I live with a workaholic, so neither of us are particularly good at switching off and doing the nice things because work always seems to take priority. As Natalie said, I have officially been juggling 2 jobs for just over a year, and before that, unofficially since about 2021. So everything I'm going to talk about tonight is based on all of my experiences, whether they're good or bad, and I hope that there'll be something at some point that you can take away and use to your benefit. But before I talk about some of the initiatives we've done as an organisation, I think what's really important is that we consider what we can do at a micro level that in turn will impact the culture and the ethos of our workplace. So as a former English teacher, which is where I started, I get quite frustrated with the dilution of certain words. So before we start, and at risk of teaching people to suck eggs, I wanted to reiterate what we mean when we talk about the word or use the word stress. So as you can see here, there are two types of stress. Eustress is the positive stress, the stress that I'm feeling now because I'm delivering a presentation to people and I can't see you, I can't see your reactions. So I'm having that feeling at the moment. It's the one that we experience the most of the time, and actually it's not a bad thing. It's good for us. It shifts up the hormones in our body. It doesn't last a long time, and it won't have any negative long-term health effects. However, what we need to think about is what happens when we are in a different mode. So if we're exposed to distress, as it says here, that negative stress, that is what can have an impact on us in the long run. So if you're sitting thinking, why is it important that I prioritise my well-being? Well, actually, I would imagine the fact that you're on this webinar suggests that you are very aware of why you need to do that. But if you have to tell other people about why it's important to think about well-being, I think what's on the slide here says it all. I'm not going to go into the science because I'm not a scientist, but it's important that we think about our immune system and how that can be impacted by too much stress. And also think about our emotions, the way that we behave. Do we get particularly angry? Do we get really anxious and negative? Think about all those things that we do, and then think about potentially the impact on the relationships with those people around us, whether in work or whether at home. So, as I've said, this person is definitely not me. I know from personal experience just the impact that not prioritising my own well-being can have on my own body. So when I was a teenager, when I was at school, at the end of a term, my mum said you could always tell that it was the end of a school term, Christmas, Easter, the summer, because I was always ill, because I had given school my all. When I was studying for my degree, as soon as I handed in my dissertation, I went down with glandular fever. Couldn't finish my finals. I had to go back and redo the whole of the year all over again. Ironically, when I was doing the Wellbeing Award for schools, and I've been working with colleagues and we've been implementing that, I was trying to pull together the portfolio because I hadn't organised it in time, and I did about 19 days on a stretch and then ended up with shingles, which is probably the worst thing that could have happened to me at that particular time. So, as I've said, I'm not by any means a shining example of someone who walks the walk. So what I do know, though, from those experiences is that we need to be very, very aware of our own limitations. We need to be able to do a body check. We need to listen to our thoughts and to press pause, as Ali's already said, when it gets too much. So you've done a lot of listening, and I'm going to ask you now to just pause. So you might have done this activity with students, so bear with me. I want you to, if you've got a piece of paper, you can draw it. Otherwise, I want you to imagine a bucket of water. And then what I want you to do is visualize a line. Where is your emotional level right now? And that can be positive, it can be negative. It doesn't really matter. So where is that line? Is it near the bottom? Or is it somewhere where there's a lot of emotions going on and it's quite high up in the bucket? And now what I want you to do, and I'm going to stop talking for a minute, I want you to name those emotions. What are the words that you would fill that bucket with at the moment? And again, positive and negative, and I'm going to stop for a moment. So, how did that feel? I think sometimes as adults, we can often feel quite uncomfortable sitting with our feelings. Sometimes we fear the consequences of being honest about our thoughts and our feelings. And I think sometimes when we feel that our bucket is really quite full, that if we start thinking about what those emotions are, we start to name them, that actually it's just going to tip us completely over the edge. Sometimes I think people are often quite fearful about being judged. So I can reflect a number of years ago now, a former colleague of mine was on a secondment with the leadership team, and they'd come into my office and sort of offload and talk about workload and feeling quite overwhelmed and not knowing what to do next. And I'd say, well, who have you told about it? What have you said? And the response was, oh, I'm not saying anything because I'd appear weak. Now, for me, that is obviously that person's choice. That was their decision. But I think it's really important, and it's already been alluded to earlier, that as a leader, whether you're a middle leader, whether you're a senior leader, whatever position you have in a school or a college, it's important to be able to say to people, actually, I'm having a bad day. Not every day, not all the time, but actually to be able to acknowledge that you feel overwhelmed. That really helps people understand where you're at, but know then that you are honest, and that can't say the word, reciprocity means that they feel that they can come to you. So it's really important that we can model that I'm human, I'm willing to listen to you, you can trust me because I'm honest about my own feelings. And that's how we build relationships in school. We do it with young people. It's important that we do it with adults as well. And if we do have that honesty, that transparency, then people can feel that they belong and they potentially feel less alone. So if we go back to the bucket analogy, I want you to consider the level at which you function on a regular basis. So are you aware of your emotions, or do you ignore them? What do you do when your bucket feels like it's going to overflow? Do you hibernate? Do you become really short-tempered? Do you cry more than usual? And I know certainly from past experience, for me, that crying, when I think, why am I crying? It keeps happening. That's when I know that actually I have reached saturation. So do you see the connection between the stresses on the right-hand side that you can see there, many of which Manisha and Ali have already referenced, and the point at which your bucket starts to overflow? Do you check yourself before you get to that point? And are you able to find the right person to listen to you, who will respond to you in a reassuring and measured way? So it's not necessarily somebody that's going to absorb everything or say the things that they think you want to hear. It's important for you to find the right person, the right support. Is it in school? Is it outside school? So education support, I know, is a brilliant service. They've already been referenced. Within our foundation, we have employee assistance through Medigold. Lots of organisations use similar services. So if you don't think that to anybody in school that you feel comfortable enough to talk to, then look outside and see who can be there to help. One of the other things I think it's important, and as I've already said, I've had various sort of minor health conditions, if you like, but I think we do need to be very, very aware of our bodies. So our emotions can often be very front and centered, but do we actually think, how is my body feeling at this particular moment? So how many of us leave a niggle because we're too busy to be ill? And I have definitely used that narrative myself. So before I had shingles, I was starting to feel quite achy in my lymph nodes. And I kept thinking, I feel a little bit under the weather. But I was thinking, we're coming up to the end of the winter term. Yeah, we're coming up to Christmas. Yeah, I don't feel very well, but, I'm all right. And I could almost prophesize that I was going to be unwell, but I kept going. Now, having then become really poorly with shingles, I know not to ignore those signs again. And I wonder how many people here, or people are guilty of presenteeism. So that mantra, and I know Ali's already said it, I must go to work, they can't manage without me, I have so much to do. That's absolutely rubbish. The world's not going to stop if you don't go into teach year 11, or that you go in and very kindly spread your germs everywhere. So, you know, that's one thing, that you spread germs, but another is you might have something that's much more serious, that's underlying, that you think, actually, I'm going to ignore this because I've got other things to do. You really, really must be aware of your physical health as much as what's going on in your mind. Go to the GP, talk to other people. In our foundation, we can use occupational health. But as Ali said, sometimes people within organisations don't actually know how to access support. So if you know, then share that information with everybody. Promote those services on a regular basis. Within our school, our line managers also do return to work after somebody's been off sick, whether it's a week, whether it's a day or longer. So if that's something that you don't do in your school or your organisation, think about setting that up. So that opportunity to sit down with somebody who's been ill gives you a chance to find out if there's anything else they want to talk about. That's not probing their illness, but actually, if they keep being off with colds, it might suggest that they're permanently run down. Does that mean that they're struggling with the amount of work they've got? It could be that they've got young children who keep bringing lurgies home back from primary school, but there might be actually something that can be done within school, or it might be something that they need to reflect on. Are they sleeping enough? Are they eating properly? Are they resting? So think about how that conversation can go about if somebody has been off. Other things to think about that I've alluded to is I think the only way that staff will believe that there is well-being that is of importance within the school is to be open and transparent, and to be able to show that it's okay not to be okay. So I know one school who give staff time off for their birthday. That's a fantastic thing to do. But if you were working for an organisation where there's something really, really positive going on, but actually the expectation is that you work really long hours, the culture is quite toxic, then actually what you're trying to do is put a sticking plaster on a fractured leg and hoping it's going to heal, and it won't. So whilst we are all responsible for our own well-being to a certain extent, often the problems we have with our own emotional and physical health come about because of systemic failures. So including staff wellbeing in the school development plan, for example, highlights its importance and keeps it front and centre when decisions about workload, assessments, marking, feedback can be considered. So I'm going to mention some training I did with Anna Freud in a moment, but this is a really good video, and I'm hoping that somebody will share the link in the chat. And this is all about how we are all part of the system. So we need to model good practice if we're to have the chance of improving the well-being of others in our organisation. So this video is all about distributed leadership and how everyone is responsible for that within the organisation. So as I've said already, it's worth thinking about the training that is available to you. So to help you in your journey to having a more positive wellbeing culture, you can find lots and lots of resources on the Anna Freud website. And as Natalie's already said, I've been very involved for quite a long time now. So back in 2020, I had to look back and see how long ago it was. I did the 5 Steps webinar, and that really helped me formulate a plan for supporting staff at a time when, during the pandemic, it was the most challenging educational period in our recent history. So those steps that are evidence-based, that framework really helped me think about how I approach everything that I do around mental health in school, and also think about staff as well. So if you're at the start of your whole school journey, it's worth thinking about that. In my case, I'm about to review our school practice, certainly focusing on staff wellbeing. And I'm also about to look at our trust-wide plan and our strategic plan, and review everything, think about what we do in schools across the foundation, think about what we do in our own, and think about actually what comes next. So if you think about the green section there, that understanding need, as has already mentioned by both Ali and Manisha, the one way to do this is to engage staff through regular surveys, and that really helps gather valuable feedback. So many of us in schools use tools to get information from young people, SDQs, RCADs, letters to self, whole range of different things. But do we do that for our staff? So sometimes Academy Trusts, MATs run surveys, which ours does, but sometimes it's really important to drill down what's going on in your school or your organisation. So as Ali said, getting a baseline measure means that we then have something to work on. So in the last 7 years that I've been a safeguarding lead and working on wellbeing, we've run 3 surveys. And I'm about to run another one, and I'm looking to Anna Freud and all the resources there to help me produce that. So for me, it's important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So when you are looking at surveys, absolutely use ones that are there already, because it saves you so much time and effort. But think about things that are already in place. Think about asking staff, what have you already done? What's had a really good and significant impact on them? What might they have said 2 years ago? Do those feelings about those same issues still exist? Have things changed? Have things improved? So think about all of those things. Look back to the activities that you did during lockdown, which, I know we like to forget about that, but we were doing weekly wellbeing check-ins with staff. We were sending out birthday cards. We were doing the toilet roll challenge. It might have been a national thing. It might just have been in Birmingham. But we're doing lots and lots of things that really supported staff morale in a difficult time. And then I think sometimes when we've come back, we've not necessarily held on to some of those things that we could do. So as Ali's already said, when you send out surveys, you've got to be prepared for answers. And sometimes you've got to ask the difficult questions and know that you are going to get answers that sometimes you think, actually, I've spent a lot of time working really hard on wellbeing. And you have to pause and think, actually, I'm not going to take this personally. I need to evaluate those responses because they're important. It's also
sorry.
Hello.
I'm just going to interrupt. I'm so sorry. We are running out of time
okay.
on the webinar. Apologies, the timekeeping's not been too good. But we've probably got about 2 more minutes.
Oh, crikey. Okay.
Yeah, if we could maybe wrap up with a couple of slides.
I will whiz through.
And then we'll move on to the Q&A, just so there's a little
absolutely fine. Okay, so I was going to talk about what you do. Think about radiating and not draining. I think that's really important. And thinking about meeting new staff and making sure that there's a real positive atmosphere in staff rooms. I also wanted to talk about thinking about certain people within your organisation who take on that rescuer role, and how it's important to sort of try and support those people and try and encourage them to be more coaching. I also wanted to talk about supervision, reflective practice. I've had the training from Manisha and Ali, and I'm looking at a policy for our foundation in that respect. I also wanted to talk about, we talked about different services that are available. There are bespoke services like Papyrus. So if somebody's had to deal with a suicide ideation disclosure, then there is a fantastic debrief service for staff as well. Think about staff CPD. I've delivered lots of training for staff, and those are some of the examples there. And also think about how you share information with staff. I've got the foundation policies here. This is our staff intranet, where you can see there's a staff wellbeing section. And think about how you organise your time and how you organise and use technology efficiently to help you. So these are my favourites, and I've sectioned them so I can just organise my time and find things easier. These are some of the things that we do within our foundation. There's lots and lots of other things that I could have talked to about that there, and I've actually got about 26 slides. Think about language use, think about comparison being the thief of joy, circles of control and where that sits. Definitely think about saying no, the world doesn't end. And I had got some examples I can't use. And I'd got a fantastic story about holding a glass, and it's not about being a half empty or a half full scenario. So I think I will stop there, even though, as we said, I had quite a lot I was going to say.
Apologies, Jane. Sorry.
All right.
Sorry about that. What we can do though, we'll share your slides if you're happy with us sharing.
Absolutely fine.
And also, Jane, I'm just wondering if people have any questions, can they get in touch either with yourself directly or with us, and we can forward them on to you?
Absolutely, no problem at all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry again to butt in. So
okay.
We're going to move on to the Q&A and bring you back. And maybe there's some things that you can cover there, hopefully, as well in the Q&A. We've had lots and lots of questions and lots of interest from the audience. So I'd like to invite Ali and Manisha back, and we can try and cover as many questions as we can from the audience. So thank you so much. And Jane, it was brilliant to hear about your experiences and bring some of the kind of context and the research and everything that Ali and Manisha were talking about, and really bring it to life with your example. So thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to look at the Q&A questions. So we've had lots and lots of questions in. We've got about 12 minutes for the Q&A. So one of the questions I wanted to touch on was, there was quite a few around training in CPD. So someone has asked, is there any training that you could recommend on how to be a good listener or ask the right questions? We've had a couple of staff go off, but line managers, heads of departments, colleagues weren't aware of issues before this. So I don't know if anyone's got any recommendations around training, or maybe just best practice around sort of listening and asking the right questions.
Thanks, Natalie. So we do a lot around active listening in our reflective practice and supervision training. And actually, we do lots and lots of different activities. And I think what I would say is that people often mistakenly think that the conversation needs to take place with the line manager, and often that's where it falls short, because I think people are worried about sharing anything around wellbeing with their line manager for fear of any kind of like performance related issue. So I think it is all about who chooses to do that training. But yeah, I would hugely recommend, obviously it's our product, but I would hugely recommend our reflective practice training. And hopefully Jane could be testament to the fact that actually the listening skills are key in that training. And I think what you learn from that is super helpful in terms of taking that back to your school.
Thank you. Jane, did you have anything to add around sort of listening, active listening, or anything from the training that you found useful?
No, I agree, actually. I think it is about finding the right person. I think I said, finding somebody that you can trust, but it goes back to what I was saying about culture, that yes, we can all think about ourselves and maybe think, yes, there is somebody in the school, but actually there should be lots of people within the school that people can talk to. So if there is a problem because staff don't feel they can talk to other people, then that is something that needs to come from the senior leadership team. That's the head teachers, the senior leaders have got to model that practice of being able to say, actually, yeah, things are tough, and being honest and having that open door policy. And I agree, the reflective practice, solution circles that I've done work with in our school, all of those things help, but it's got to go back to the culture of the school.
Thank you so much. Another question around CPD. So someone asked, when we talk about CPD, is it suggested that school staff gain skills in understanding mental health conditions and supporting young people, or skills to support themselves?
Can I jump in with that one?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I would say both. In order for staff to be able to feel fully equipped to support the children and people that they're working with, or adults if they're working in colleges, it's really important that staff understand language. Jane mentioned as well about that sort of blurring of language and difficult language sometimes. So for staff to feel that they have a good understanding of emotional literacy, and that they can sort of like embed that within the teaching and learning that they provide. So it's about ensuring that staff understand language and feel comfortable and empowered to be able to have conversations or take and understand disclosures or know how to signpost. That's really empowering in one respect, but then equally having CPD around self-care and being able to to understand our own well-being and look after staff well-being is also incredibly important. So I think it's equally weighted, and making sure that staff feel fully enabled and empowered to be able to support themselves and to support their learners.
Thank you so much, Ali. That was really helpful. There was a couple of questions around how to support staff without it feeling tokenistic. So there was a couple of comments around it not feeling like a token gesture, and how can you show recognition without it seeming trite? And I don't know if anyone would like to jump in there.
I'm happy to start and then hand to you, Jane. We're probably going to be on the same page. I think, again, it's exactly what Jane was saying. It goes back to the whole school approach, the culture and ethos of the school. And it has to be like properly embedded, coming, as Jane said, from the leadership team down, so that, you know, that recognition is genuine and is actually properly heartfelt, and actually it's not tokenistic. I've seen so many examples of staff wellbeing which is tokenistic, like a yoga class, for example, which obviously not everybody necessarily wants to do. Great for some people, but not everybody. So I think it starts with that survey. It really starts with getting to the nitty-gritty and finding out what it is that your staff want, what's going to be helpful. And then I think finding ways where you can embed that. And then I think it's really helpful to say to staff, you know, you said we did, this is exactly, you know, the feedback that we're responding to. And I think, as Jane said, difficult messages are sometimes given in staff surveys. And I think sometimes the senior leadership team doesn't want to hear what's being voiced through those surveys, but it's about being brave and saying, actually, no, you know, I really value my staff and I want this to be better for them.
Thank you, Manisha. Jane, did you have anything to add?
I was going to say Ali had a hand up, but no, I think the simple things like saying thank you is the starting point. So I'm not in school on briefing days anymore because I'm working at a foundation, but the last few years when we do staff briefing, leadership team, any member of staff has a chance to say thank you. So it goes into our briefing notes, thank you for taking a trip, or we do little above and beyonds and we do postcards. But that has been going for a number of years, and it's sort of entrenched. And any initiative that any school takes on, or any organisation takes on, you can't just do it once and then forget about it. It's got to be embedded and keep doing it. And, you know, if you are then going to reflect and do a survey, if people say, actually, I don't like the fact that you do that, if one or two people say it, that's one thing. But if 3/4 of the staff saying, actually, that's not what we want, then that's a different story altogether. But a simple thank you, a smile, those kinds of things, I think, is your starting point. That basic.
Thank you, Jane. Ali?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just going to quickly jump in, and I'm sort of answering another question while I'm sort of saying this, because I've noticed that somebody said, how can you encourage staff to be honest on a survey? I asked staff to do an anonymous wellbeing survey, but when we got the results, none of the issues were highlighted by staff, and I think that is a problem sometimes. But I'd go back to what I said, but also something that Jane said as well, that you've got to be brave. And I've worked in schools, I've consulted with schools where staff have just refused to do an anonymous survey because they knew that somebody was going to scrutinise details to try and work out who had said what. And that in itself, you know, therein lies a problem. So it's thinking about enabling ways for staff to be honest, and to know that whatever they say, it's not going to result in some kind of sort of punitive response. It's actually going to be listened to, and it's going to be responded to. Obviously, if all staff are asking for a trip to the Caribbean, that's not going to happen. But if what they're asking for is PPA that is done at home, then is that something that is manageable? And if it isn't, as long as that's addressed and explained, then I think that shows that at least you've valued their voice and you've listened to them. And to me, that's the absolute key. It's about listening and about people feeling valued, even if you can't give them the answer that they're looking for.
Thank you, Ali. We've probably got time for about 2 more questions. One question, again, it's kind of straddling 2 questions that have come in around leadership. I think this is a really important point. Obviously, we talk about staff, but generally, are there any strategies that support leaders or senior staff, sort of multi-academy trust staff, who might not necessarily be on board or maybe not as open to whole school approach? And also, I guess, for supporting those staff themselves, are there any sort of tips, best practice, anything you can share about how to support leaders with staff wellbeing?
So when we've encountered challenge with school leaders, which we have in training, working in different commissions, I think sharing the data. So some of the stats that I shared about, like, a happy teacher is going to get better results because of the fact they're going to be able to do their job better. You know, you can't argue with that. So there is lots and lots of contextual information that can be shared through research. And I think actually it is about having that open dialogue. It's about being able to evidence the fact that this is really genuinely going to make a difference. Sorry, Jen, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add.
No, I'd agree. And I just think you have to be relentless. You know, obviously, as I've said, I work at the foundation level now. And yes, there are varying degrees of understanding about what supervision is, what reflective practice is, what support is. And one of the things I was going to talk about is actually, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter what you call it. And I think sometimes people get hung up with some of the phrasing that we use. So just explaining, as Manisha said, how important it is that it doesn't matter what level you're at, what, you know, how many hours of work you do, that actually everybody needs an element of support. And if it's making people feel uncomfortable to call it something, call it a different name. I meet the DSLs once a term, and it ends up being like a supervision session. That's not what we call it. It's a network meeting. And it's the same if you've got head teachers that you're trying to get together, then it's a network meeting. But actually what you're trying to do is get their voice, get their opinion, help them decompress, and give them the opportunity for their voice to be heard as well.
Okay. Thank you. That's really useful, Jane. Thank you. I just wanted to also just say thank you for the comments. We've had some really lovely comments. Someone said, Jane, could you do a session at my school? We've had comments saying thank you. It's been fantastic. So yeah, just lots and lots of comments and questions and compliments also. So thank you, everyone. I'm sorry we are running out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up. But thank you so much for attending. Thank you to all of our speakers. And I just wanted to also say that we will be in touch with the slides. We had quite a few questions about the recordings and slides. We'll definitely send those out. And also, yeah, if you want to get in touch with us, schoolsinmind@annafreud.org. And so, yeah, if there's anything more that you'd like to share, or if there's anything more we can do to answer questions, we can continue the conversation there. But thank you all so much. And as we wrap up, you'll be sent directly to a feedback form. We'd really appreciate it if you could give us your feedback. It would be great and really helpful. And we hope that we see you at another webinar in the near future. But I'd like to say a huge thank you to our speakers. So thank you so much, Manisha. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Jane. You've all been wonderful. And I'm just sorry we didn't have more time to cover everything we wanted to today. But I hope that everyone has found it useful. Thank you all so much for attending. Take care.